Debbie, thank you again for all of your support and hard work to make the state of Colorado safer. Go ahead and take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your attendance today. I really do appreciate your interest, your support, and your attention to cybersecurity. So I am Debbie Blyth, and I am the State Chief Information Security Officer. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do in my role, what my scope of responsibilities are. I'm going to talk about the attacks that we defend against and also the history and background of Colorado's cybersecurity program. I'm going to talk about ransomware, and I'm going to give you some context around the size of the threat. And I'm going to talk about unemployment insurance fraud, because I certainly have been a victim of this, and maybe you have too. I'm also going to talk about cybersecurity challenges that we face in the state of Colorado and where we need your help. And then I will save plenty of time for questions at the end. So my team, we're responsible for setting statewide policies and also for the cybersecurity strategy. And we manage the annual budget for cybersecurity for 17 executive branch agencies, those consolidated agencies of the executive branch. We also report on enterprise security risk, and we track audits. We help facilitate all of those IT audits that are performed against those executive branch agencies. And then we track remediation efforts as well. We perform proactive security, so risk assessments for all of our critical and essential applications that OIT manages on behalf of the agencies. There's about 150 of those. We also assess vendor compliance with state security policies and with regulatory requirements. And we participate in all new projects to ensure that systems and implementations are architected and coded securely. We manage all state user identities, including for about 30,000 state employees, and then another 30,000 county and other workers who access state systems. And we provide quarterly security awareness training for all state employees. And then lastly, we perform security monitoring and incident response, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So you're probably wondering, what do we do for non-consolidated agencies? They still have to abide by the statewide cybersecurity policies that we set. And so we do collaborate and we include them in our process each time we update to make sure that we're incorporating their input and to ensure that the resulting policies are something that we can all adhere to. Now, non-consolidated agencies are required to submit annually an agency cybersecurity plan. We review these and we provide feedback as needed. We also conduct a monthly security leaders meeting in which security leaders from each of these non-consolidated agencies participate. And in fact, the leader of security for the legislative branch, including the General Assembly, Larry Hofer, he also participates in these meetings. Now, these monthly meetings help us to have statewide alignment on strategy as it makes sense. And we also provide consulting and guidance as requested, and this goes in both directions, so we advise each other. Now, we also share threat intelligence information broadly across state agencies and also local governments. And for those agencies who use the Colorado State Network to get to the internet, they are beneficiaries of best of breed security that we have built into the Colorado State Network. Now, you will notice that the legislative branch is not consolidated. So for the General Assembly, Larry Hofer is your security contact, and he does conduct security awareness training for you that I would encourage you to take advantage of regularly. Now, the state of Colorado is constantly under attack. We experience more than 8 million security events each day. And a security event may be as benign as a mistyped password, or it could be as serious as an actual indicator of an attack in progress. So we have deployed a security strategy that we call defense in depth. So firstly, we stop threats from coming in. Now, if they make it past that first defense, then we detect them and stop them on the endpoint. And if they make it through those first two defenses, then we block the malware from communicating outbound to the internet. And of course, if all else fails, we are ready to respond quickly to contain and eradicate threats as needed. So as you heard earlier, the number one way that malware gets into an organization is through email. Now, more than half the email floating around on the internet is actually spam, and that is consistent year over year. And when an email includes a malicious attachment, half the time these are office files. In fact, last year we assisted a county who was completely crippled by an email attachment. This came into their environment disguised as a Microsoft Word document called invoice. So of course, thinking it was an invoice, you would open that and click on it, at which time the county was infected with a very debilitating type of malware. Now, for this county, as is true with most types of malware, the only way to recover is to actually completely wipe and reinstall all infected systems. Now, there was a 64% rise in email threats in 2020. In fact, every year sees more threats than the prior year. Now, Google, our email platform, has some spam protection built in. However, we have seen over and over that Google's email protection just is not robust enough for us. So in 2019, we implemented a best of breed email filtering tool that gives us much more robust email filtering and blocking capabilities. So after Google gets done blocking the threats that it blocks, our email filtering tool blocks another 32,000 emails per month. So this chart that you're looking at represents all of the email that we blocked using this tool in first quarter of this year. It was more than 96,000 messages, which were directed at state employees specifically, and they were very stealthily crafted to escape most email filters. In fact, these threats would certainly have made it into our environment without this tool. So, as I mentioned, for threats that make it past this tool, we do detect and we stop threats on the endpoint. We have an endpoint detection and response tool that is deployed to all servers, all workstations, and all laptops. Now, this tool is very powerful, and it's much smarter about detecting threats in our servers, workstations, and laptops than any of the old antivirus software that you've heard of in the past. So this tool is actually successfully blocking between 50 and 350 critical and high-risk threats per month. And these were threats that were not previously being blocked by any of our other endpoint security tools. So this tool has successfully prevented several security incidents that would have otherwise been extremely impactful to any agency. And it works whether our employees are connected to the state network, or they're working from home, or they're working from someplace else in the world. This tool ensured that we had maximum security to enable a fully remote workforce during our COVID response. Since this tool does not require employees to be connected to the state network in order for it to remain up to date and for them to remain fully protected. Now, because of this tool, state systems are better protected than ever before, and the threat of a successful malware or ransomware attack is greatly reduced. Now, if malware escapes all of our controls, the email filtering and the endpoint detection, once that malware is installed, most types will try to make a connection outbound to the internet, to what is called a command and control server. And it checks in with this malicious server to get instructions on what it should do next. Now, our firewalls are detecting and blocking this outbound traffic, and not just for executive branch agencies. Many non-consolidated agencies and institutes of higher education are also using the Colorado State Network, and we are keeping them protected as well by our state firewalls. Now, because as you've heard, attackers are very persistent and very well funded, we are prepared to respond quickly when needed. Our Security Operations Center is constantly monitoring for security incidents, and they have help from the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. We have something called Albert sensors in our environment. And they are monitored, and then they alert us when they see security incidents. We also have a managed security service that monitors our endpoint detection and response tool set, and they help to respond to any security events. And we have an incident response plan in place. It is well rehearsed and it is kept up to date. And we use that to respond to any security incidents that we see. So I want to talk about and give you a little bit of history and background of Colorado's cybersecurity program. So Colorado's cybersecurity strategy is guided by an approach called Secure Colorado. This is our multi-year cybersecurity plan. Now, the two main goals of this plan are to continue to reduce risk and the likelihood of successful cyber attacks, and to justify an ongoing budget for cybersecurity improvements. Now, as a framework, and to ensure that we maintain continued focus on those controls that provide high value and the most cost-effective risk reduction, we use the CIS critical security controls. This is a framework that consists of 18 controls with several sub-controls each. And it's continuously evolved by industry experts from the Department of Defense and other federal entities, such as the private sector. And it takes inputs from the threat landscape to ensure that each of these controls are the controls that will provide us the very best protection from current and emerging threats. And this is how many states, including the state of Colorado, are operationalizing the NIST cybersecurity framework. Now, our policies are based on NIST, as is the CIS critical controls, which is why we believe that this is the right framework for the state of Colorado. Now, I'll talk a little bit about our budget progression and some of the accomplishments that we've been able to make with that budget. So back in 2012, there was no security consistency between agencies. Some agencies were more mature in their cybersecurity strategies. Some agencies were not mature at all. There was also no budget for security improvements. So this is sort of when Secure Colorado was being created. By 2014, the Secure Colorado strategy was implemented, and we had successfully allocated a modest budget for security program improvements. And we had deployed a standard antivirus across all of the state. We were rolling this out. Other security improvements were also underway, and the budget was estimated to be about 1.3% of the overall IT statewide spend. Now, the overall IT statewide spend is estimated to be approximately $350 million annually. And this estimate includes both what OIT spends, as well as what agencies spend on technology and IT services annually. Now, by 2016, we had implemented a best-of-breed next-generation firewall at our perimeter, and we had implemented two-step verification for Google. We had also implemented more than 600 audit recommendations that had been outstanding for years and years and years. And our budget at this point was estimated to be 2.5% of the overall IT statewide spend. By 2018, we had purchased and we were implementing that endpoint detection and response tool set that I had mentioned. And we had launched a project to update all agency firewalls to our best-of-breed firewall. We also were implementing an identity and access management tool set to manage all of those statewide user identities. And the budget was estimated to be about 3.6% of the overall statewide IT spend. Now, 20 and 21 were really exciting years for us in improving our cybersecurity. In 2020, we effectively doubled our cybersecurity budget so that we could accelerate the completion of security projects that were already underway to reduce the likelihood and impact of another successful cyber attack. And we continued to remediate outstanding audit findings and to fix other known gaps in our environment. At this point, the cybersecurity budget was estimated to be about 6.2% of the overall statewide IT spend. And for fiscal year 22, we will be sustaining and maintaining those processes, tools, employees, and salaries that we implemented in 2020. And of course, we'll be continuing cybersecurity improvements across the state. The budget is estimated to be about 4% of the overall statewide IT spend. Now, we aren't done because security is never done. So we will continue to assess our program for weaknesses and gaps, and we will request money along the way to continue to improve cybersecurity for the state of Colorado. So you may be wondering, how do we compare with other states? Well, Deloitte and the National Association of State CIOs, NASCIO, conducts a national state cybersecurity study every 2 years. And this study is a fantastic source to provide information on what other states are doing. Now, according to this study, most states spend between 1 and 3% of their overall statewide IT spend on cybersecurity. Now, Colorado spends slightly more. So we are in the top 22% of the best funded states in the nation. Now, in 2018, a new category was created because 10% of the states in the nation are now spending between 6 and 10% of their overall IT spend on cybersecurity. And as we have done historically, we will continue to identify opportunities to make thoughtful budgetary requests to incrementally improve our cybersecurity spend over time. Now, we are very proud of Secure Colorado, our cybersecurity strategy. We have received nationwide recognition and numerous awards for providing quick and sustainable risk reduction, for innovation in cybersecurity, and for providing outstanding business value and thought leadership. Additionally, the National Governors Association has used Secure Colorado as a template for their policy academy multiple times to help lesser mature states develop a cybersecurity strategy. So here's a question. Does an award-winning security program mean that you'll never have a highly impactful security incident? Well, unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. So you may remember that Colorado fell victim to a SamSam Ransomware attack in February of 2018 when it hit our Colorado Department of Transportation. It took their business operations offline for a month, forcing them to resort to workarounds and manual processes to continue to pay vendors and employees on time. Now, the response was huge. At one point, we had more than 130 people helping us to contain and eradicate the malware and to restore CDOT. However, in the end, this is a story about how having a good cybersecurity plan in place helps you to recover from a serious cybersecurity incident. Now, there were a few things that we had in our favor. So we had just completed a project called Backup Colorado. So we were confident that we were backing up all of CDOT's production servers and that those backups were offline and not affected by the ransomware. And we had tested this backup process and the ability to restore. And so we were very confident. So it never occurred to us to pay the ransom. We also had good network segmentation in place, which prevented the spread of the malware from CDOT's business operations into their traffic operations environment. And it also prevented it from spreading to other state agencies. We also had a very good incident response plan in place, and we had practiced this plan many, many times with many participants, including with our key incident response partners, the Colorado National Guard. And then because of our security program and our ongoing continuous efforts to improve security, we actually had many of the right tools and the right security efforts already underway. So in order for us to recover, it was relatively simple to accelerate many of our security projects to do such things such as limiting privilege access, implementing two-factor authentication for all of our remote access, implementing a brand new firewall for CDOT, and rolling out that endpoint detection and response tool set to prevent future occurrences and to protect the rest of the state. And we implemented many other security improvements as we were recovering without spending additional or unplanned money. And not only did we just implement these for CDOT, we implement all of these protections across the state to protect all of our state agencies. Now, there was a quote that we really liked that was in a State Scoop article. They said, if there's a playbook for bouncing back from a ransomware incident, it might resemble the one the Colorado Office of Information Technology developed last year when that state's transportation agency had its own run-in with the SamSam virus. So I want to present to you a contrasting business case that really illustrates the point that having a cybersecurity program in place helps you to recover from a cyber attack and helps you to contain the scope of the impact and the costs associated with the attack. So CDOT was hit with the SamSam ransomware attack in February of 2018. We spent about $1.7 million recovering. CDOT's business operations was offline for 4 weeks, and we spent about 8 weeks total recovering. CDOT experienced very little data loss. Certainly no data associated with any of their production systems was lost. We recovered 100% of that. And this incident did not affect the residents of our state at all, unless of course they were CDOT or OIT employees. Now contrast that with Atlanta, who experienced the very same SamSam ransomware attack exactly a month later. Atlanta spent 10 times what we did, $17 million recovering, and greater than 6 months with 1/3 of their services offline for 3 months or more. Atlanta suffered significant data loss, including 10 years of public safety data. And this incident had significant impact to the city of Atlanta and its residents. The urgency and priority of ransomware preparedness has really been elevated, and it is top priority of the President of the United States. When CDOT was hit with ransomware, the impact was that almost 2,000 of their systems were encrypted, making the data contained within unusable. However, a new type of ransomware is much more popular. Before the systems are encrypted, the data is copied. The threat is that if you don't pay the ransom, not only will your systems remain unusable, but the attackers will release your data and they will publish the fact that they've breached your organization very publicly. They call this name and shame. So, I mean, it's bad enough when a company or a state or local government suffers a ransomware attack, since it can cripple their business for a period of time while they attempt to recover. But it's even worse when it's combined with a data breach, because now they have to perform notifications to impacted individuals, to the Attorney General's office, to federal agencies whose data may have been included in the breach, and potentially pay fines. And you may or may not be familiar with the term ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service means that you don't have to be a skilled attacker to launch a ransomware attack. You can outsource every part of this attack, including a very professional service desk where victims can call and get help if they don't know how to buy Bitcoin to pay the ransom. Now, ransomware has been on the rise since 2016, and unfortunately, this trend is predicted to continue for several years. So I created a slide here that show a few statistics that demonstrate how impactful ransomware can be. For businesses and governments that are hit with ransomware, the average downtime is 21 days. And it typically takes around 287 days to fully recover. And more victims are actually paying the ransom than ever before. It's estimated that victims paid approximately $350 million in 2020, which is more than a 300% increase over 2019. And the average ransom demand has gone up too. The average payment is more than $312,000, which is almost double what the demand was in 2019. And of course, we know the demand can be huge if the attackers believe that the company can afford it. In 2021, we've already seen 2 huge notable ransomware attacks: the Colonial Pipeline, in which the ransomware demand was $4.4 million. And then JBS Meatpacking, in which the ransomware demand was $11 million. Now, in 2020, nearly 2,400 US-based governments, healthcare facilities, schools were victims of ransomware. And another scary statistic that I've just heard recently is that greater than 90% of those who actually pay the ransom don't get all of their data back. Now, cyber criminals did not slow down at all during the pandemic. In fact, the US Secret Service said that these attacks actually increased during the pandemic, and that many of these were focused on the US healthcare and public health sector. And experts have predicted that the damage caused by ransomware could cost a worldwide amount of $265 billion by 2031, since this type of cybercrime is attacking both enterprises and consumers at a rate of one attack every few seconds. Now, the White House just recently came out with a memo. The memo was called "What We Urge You to Do to Protect Against the Threat of Ransomware," and this was released in June. It included 5 best practices and then 5 additional recommendations, which are meant to provide guidance to help businesses to significantly reduce the risk of a successful cyber attack. Now, for each of these points, you'll see I've added a green check mark to indicate that we actually have each of these things in place. So the 5 best practices: multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, encryption, a skilled, empowered cybersecurity team, and then rapid patching and the incorporation of threat intelligence information. Now, one thing to note is that most of these best practices cannot be deployed to legacy technologies. So those older systems that may still be running important applications in our environment, they may not be able to accommodate these best practices. And I will talk more about that later. So in addition to the 5 best practices, the memo also contained 5 recommendations. So having a backup strategy, updating and patching systems promptly. That was so important. It was also included in the best practices. Testing your incident response plan, penetration testing, and network segmentation. So if you'll recall, network segmentation for us, it exists between all agencies and is the reason that the 2018 ransomware incident did not spread to additional agencies. Now, one additional control, this was not included in the White House memo, but based on OIT's 2018 experience with ransomware, we implemented privileged access management as a way to decrease the risk associated with ransomware. Now, privileged accounts are those accounts that have greater access privileges. Those are those accounts that are allowed to make changes to servers, to network infrastructure, to workstations, and to other systems within the state environment. OIT continues to inventory and reduce the numbers of privileged accounts and has added extra monitoring for these. And we've also implemented vaulting technology and multi-factor authentication to ensure that these accounts are checked out when needed and cannot be reused by attackers. Now, I want to take a brief segue here and talk a little bit about unemployment insurance fraud. On this chart, you may recall hearing about some of these recent data breaches that occurred over the past years. In fact, you may recognize some of these because you yourself may have been a victim of one of these. I personally was a victim of 3 of these, lucky me. In so many of these breaches, we weren't really even sure what was going to be done with the information collected, but we knew that it would probably come back to haunt us at some point. Now, cyber criminals often steal personally identifiable information, or PII, because it is worth money on the cyber black market. Unemployment fraud actually occurred in all 50 states, and it was exacerbated by the pandemic and the relaxing of the typical restrictions and validations to help get money quickly into the hands of the people who need it. And the more public of a person you are, the easier it is for fraudsters to find information on you. Once they've got a name of a legitimate person, they can actually buy the PII data associated with your name, especially if you've been a victim of any of those cyber breaches. In a USA Today article, They interviewed a cyber criminal in January about this. He was a student in Nigeria. He estimated that he had made about $50,000 since the pandemic began in unemployment insurance fraud. He uses public sources of information to gather a list of names of legitimate people, and then he paid $2 in cryptocurrency to buy the stolen PII data, like date of birth and social security number, that was associated with those names. The stolen PII data is widely available on the darknet because of all of those breaches that we saw on the last slide. And by the way, that was just a sample of breaches. There are many, many, many more breaches that have happened over the years that have exposed our PII data. So once the fraudster had that information, he used it then to file fraudulent unemployment claims on behalf of those individuals while attempting to get money redirected to himself. Now, Joe Barella, who is the executive director of CDLE, he wrote a really good article and he referenced this story. And he talked about the impact of CDLE and what CDLE has done in an attempt to cut down on this fraud. So CDLE launched MyUI Plus, a new unemployment insurance application, and they included sophisticated anti-fraud measures, which were estimated to have prevented between $7 and $10 billion in fraudulent payments in January alone. So if, like me, a fraudster filed an unemployment claim in your name, then, like me, your PII is already for sale on the dark net. And then you may need to take steps to protect your credit. So you can get some very good information on CDLE's website, cdle.colorado.gov/fraud-prevention, or on a website supported by Colorado's Attorney General, stopfraudcolorado.gov. So now I'm going to talk to you about some of the cybersecurity challenges that I need your help with. So I already mentioned legacy technology. Older network infrastructure, operating systems, and systems that we'd call legacy are difficult to secure because the vendor may no longer be supporting these, which means that as new cybersecurity threats are discovered, updates are not being released for these older systems. And modern security configurations like longer passwords or encryption or two-factor authentication may not be supported. Additionally, with most of our legacy systems, the individuals who have knowledge of these systems become fewer and fewer over time, which creates a huge risk, especially as more and more of our workforce becomes retirement eligible. Now, we have requested money as part of the American Recovery Plan to replace older legacy and outdated systems and to refresh and modernize state systems and infrastructure. When we modernize these systems, this will allow us to ensure that the system is hardened with current updates and patches, is configured with modern security, and is architected with security built in, is also more widely supportable by a greater number of current and prospective employees. Now, another challenge that we face is regarding the cybersecurity workforce. When I talk to other CISOs, whether they're local or across the nation, it really doesn't matter if they're private sector or public sector. We are all having the same problem, which is hiring and retaining skilled cybersecurity professionals. Now, CyberSeek said that within the past year, US employers posted over 464,000 job openings for cybersecurity workers. And there are currently only around 956,000 cybersecurity professionals. So as you can see in Colorado, there are more than 17,000 open positions. To fill all of these, we need 50% more cybersecurity professionals in the workforce. I spend a lot of time talking with students about cybersecurity, mainly at the high school level, although I do talk to students at the middle school and college level as well. And when I talk to students, I talk about all of the reasons that I think cybersecurity is a great career choice. And for those who are interested, I really hope to influence them to become our future cybersecurity workforce. Now, something else that we are doing A couple of years ago, we created a Veterans Transition Program. This is a paid internship for veterans who have military cybersecurity or threat intelligence experience, or who have an interest and an aptitude and would like to get started with a cybersecurity career. We get the benefit of having their knowledge within our Security Operations Center, and we train them on our tools to enable them to make a successful transition to the next phase of their career. Our goal is to hire many of these veterans directly into our program. In fact, we've hired 8 of these awesome veterans permanently as full-time staff for the state. For those veterans that we aren't able to hire, with just 9 months in our program, it puts resume-worthy skills on their resumes, and it enables them to land really good cybersecurity jobs with other agencies or in the private sector. This program is truly the best pipeline that I've ever experienced. And I like to say it's a win-win-win. It's a win for us, it's a win for the veterans, and it's helping to address the nationwide cybersecurity workforce gap. Now, I want to talk a little bit about local governments. A very important statewide risk is local governments, because local governments provide so many critical services to their communities, and they're often very under-resourced and underprepared in the area of cybersecurity. And when the services that local governments provide are disrupted, it can be extremely impactful and may even put lives at risk. This data is related to ransomware incidents affecting state, local, tribal, and territorial governments nationwide over the past several years. Now, this information presented is only that of known ransomware incidents. Oftentimes, entities who suffer a ransomware event are successful at keeping it private. So we actually have no idea regarding the actual numbers. But as you can see, publicly known ransomware attacks aimed at state, local, tribal, and territorial governments continue to increase year after year. Now, this is a summary of all the publicly recorded cyber incidents in Colorado over the past 3 years. And as you can see, these too have grown each year. And of course, there are probably more Colorado incidents that are not listed here because they were not made public. The cost of a data breach is a well-known IBM study, and it's published annually, and it states that the highest cost saver to organizations responding to a cyber incident is having an incident response plan and team in place. In fact, the average cost of responding to a cyber incident with a plan versus without a plan represents a $2 million difference. And so that you can get a sense of how well local governments in Colorado are or are not prepared, I wanted to present you with 2 different surveys that we conducted in 2020. So this first survey was sent to local governments in partnership with the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security All Hazards Cyber Subcommittee. Of the more than 3,000 local governments in Colorado, we received 172 responses. Of these responses, 33% reported that they have an incident response plan in place. 67% reported they do not have an incident response plan in place. Now, our theory is that the bulk of the organizations who did not respond to our cybersecurity survey, especially after multiple attempts at trying to get them to respond, probably didn't respond because they either didn't have any cybersecurity personnel, they didn't understand or feel comfortable with the questions, and that probably means they do not have an incident response plan. So that means that less than 5% of local governments in Colorado have an incident response plan. So if they are hit by a cybersecurity attack, the possible impact will be more serious, the duration to the business will be longer, and the cost for them to recover will be far greater than if they had a plan. So this second survey was conducted by the Colorado Secretary of State's office, and it was sent to counties only to determine how prepared they were for election support prior to the 2020 presidential election. 50 of the 64 Colorado counties responded. 30% reported they do not have a dedicated security team. And 15% of the responders said they don't have any internal IT resources at all. So together, these surveys really tell the story that with a few exceptions, local governments are extremely unprepared in the area of cybersecurity and in responding to cybersecurity threats. Now, many local government cybersecurity personnel have actually been discussing this problem for a few years now, and they've been talking about how hard it is to get the support they need. They determined there had to be a better way forward. So in September of 2019, about 30 individuals, mainly representing local governments, came together for a working session. They described this meeting as them deciding to stop waiting for someone else to solve their cybersecurity problem and to take the initiative to develop the plan themselves. Now, in addition to local governments, there were also individuals representing the Secretary of State office, the Colorado Information and Technology, the Office of Emergency Management, the State Fusion Center, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and the Department of Homeland Security. There were only a couple of parameters this group used when developing the plan. Firstly, they said there are over 3,000 local governments in Colorado, and this plan needs to support them all. And it should support them all getting to a minimum baseline of security for the least amount of money out of their pockets. They also encouraged each other to think big. They said, if there are no limiting factors, no political, no limitations based on jurisdictions, what should this look like? And the team created what they originally called the 10-year plan. The idea was it'll probably take us 10 years to deploy these ideas. In 2020, this 10-year plan was adopted by a larger group, and it was renamed the Whole of State Cybersecurity Approach. The Whole of State Cybersecurity Approach has 6 goals. So firstly, to establish cybersecurity partnerships. Now, we do have some of these in place, but we want to do a better job of highlighting, promoting, and partnering with our academic centers of excellence. And we also want to develop partnerships to enhance those cybersecurity skills with an eye towards workforce development. Goal number 2 is to establish a state defense force. We are planning to develop our own incident response capabilities with partnership from government technology and cybersecurity personnel representing local governments across the state. And part of this goal will also include proactive security assessments so that local governments know what efforts they should be prioritizing for their cybersecurity programs. This will likely include the development of agreements with the private sector for incident response as well. Goal number 3 is to establish a cybersecurity range. And we are partnering with the National Cybersecurity Center specifically to fill this goal. The cyber range will be used in our training efforts to ensure that all of our local incident responders have consistent cybersecurity and incident response skills. This will also be the platform for workforce development, whether these are students or individuals wanting to build upon their cybersecurity skills. Goal number 4 will be to establish a cyber support center. And the National Cybersecurity Center has hired an individual and is helping to build this capability. Now, as this matures, we envision this as both a place to get assistance and guidance where you can talk to a live person, as well as a place to access resources that are written to be useful and helpful for local governments, especially those with limited, if any, cybersecurity expertise. And goal number 5 is to establish a funding program. Now, not only is the intent of this goal to figure out how we will fund our efforts, but also to put those purchasing agreements in place that allow small local governments to be able to purchase cybersecurity tools and services with the volume discounts that a larger entity such as the state is able to get. And then lastly, goal number 6 is to establish threat intelligence sharing and community collaboration. Now, we have this at least partially in place in our community. We call it the Colorado Threat Information Sharing Network, or CTIS. However, we don't have nearly enough local governments signed up yet, and we don't have anywhere near the amount of collaboration occurring that we would like to see. So we do have a couple of questions to be resolved, such as what gives us the authority or jurisdiction to guide or assist local governments? And then how will we recover or fund those cybersecurity efforts? Because as a state government, we have no jurisdiction over local governments, and we have no ability to recuperate any of the money for services that we provide to local governments. So we envision using the Governor's Cybersecurity Council to help us address statutory authority for providing those services to local governments, and to help determine how will this be funded. And then also to help determine where should these services live. Should it live within Public Safety's Office of Emergency Management, or the Governor's Office of Information Technology, or the Secretary of State's office, or the National Cybersecurity Center, or someplace else? Now, we are currently partnering with the National Cybersecurity Center to build out the Cyber Range, as mentioned, and the Cyber Support Center. In fact, the NCC has been a great partner in helping us to continue to evolve our whole of state cybersecurity efforts. We are also working with the Colorado Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management to think through how we might use some of the Homeland Security grant funding in fiscal year 23 and in future years to help build and maintain this program. So now I'm going to talk about where we need your help. The whole of state cybersecurity approach, the Governor's Council membership was refreshed with the OIT statutory refresh and charged with helping with the whole of state cybersecurity approach. So this council will be reconvening in the next couple of months to help with a recommendation regarding policy changes and funding needed to help build and support the cybersecurity services that local governments need. They are required to produce a report with their recommendations by July of 2022, and we expect that there will be a funding request attached to that. The expansion of the Veterans Transition Program, you'll likely see a decision item that we'll be asking you to fund for fiscal year 2022 to help us to expand this program. And then the reduction of technical debt. So similar to what other states are doing, we are asking for American Recovery Plan funding to help eliminate legacy technology, replacing it instead with modernized government systems. So we are really hoping that we can count on your support for each of these items. And then lastly, I want to open this up for questions and answer any questions you might have. And then I also included my email address and also Larry Hofer's email address, so that if you think of questions later, you can contact us and ask any questions. So feel free. I will stop sharing my screen, and then perhaps I can see if there are any questions. Let's see, I do see some questions in the Q&A. So Senator Jeff Bridges, do we have a good way of tracking who in Colorado is being attacked with these types of attacks, and how often our Colorado business and governments pay those ransoms? I know there was some talk at the federal level about requiring disclosure of payments, but not sure where that ended up. That is a great question, Senator Bridges. We don't necessarily have any way of tracking. I can see those attacks that are coming into state government, and so I can see what agencies are under attack. But as far as other businesses, I don't have any way of seeing that. And certainly for local governments, there's no requirement currently that local governments report to the state any of their attacks or any of their, issues, incidents, whether or not they paid the ransom. There's no reporting requirement. I do know that I've heard some talk at a federal level of requiring this type of disclosure. I don't think it's come to fruition yet. I think there are some states, I believe Texas was successful in passing some legislation that requires local governments, at least, I don't know about businesses, but local governments to report to the state for cybersecurity incidents. And it may also have a reporting requirement for whether they've paid ransom or not. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Colorado doesn't have anything in place like that. So that may be something that we would think about for the future. Another question, how does our shift to an API approach impact the Privileged Access Management program? Relatedly, how many different applications and databases across the state are included with this Privileged Access Management approach? Fantastic question. You like dug into the nuances of what we're doing. So the first year that we implemented the Privileged Access Management program, we concentrated on domain access privileges. And so we rolled it out and we are managing our domain privileged accounts at this point. This next year, we are focusing on databases, applications, services accounts. All of those will be implemented into the program. So all of those accounts will be vaulted. Applications will have to integrate to the Privileged Access Management tool to essentially check out those accounts when needed. This will ensure that those accounts cannot be reused and cannot be used to sort of replay against us to compromise sensitive data. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more technical information that you'd want to know about this, and I'm not the right person to answer it. But if you want to contact me, I'll put you in touch with our identity and access management expert who can dig into those nuances. But you are absolutely correct in that shifting to API is the right way to do this. And it's the right way to take advantage of automated capabilities for checking out those privileged accounts versus hard coding them into code in our applications. That's the wrong way to do it. So, so that is what we're moving to, and you are absolutely correct there. Another great question. What certificate do you need to work in cybersecurity? Is some version of what's needed offered by our community colleges? If so, how can we get more high school students to get that certificate while they are still in high school? Fantastic question. And when I talk with students, I recommend that they take cybersecurity classes in high school. When I was in high school, these were not offered at all. That's how old I am. But now students can actually take these in school. Another thing that I recommend is that they participate in Cyber Patriots. Cyber Patriots is a competition that most schools, or many, many schools have. It's like a club. And it's a nationwide competition where these students learn how to defend their systems against cyber attack. Cyber Patriots gives them great real-life experience on cybersecurity things like how to harden systems, how to write policies, how to be a cybersecurity professional. And it gives them great experience for when they enter the future workforce. Students can go right out of high school right into the cybersecurity workforce. They absolutely can do that. So I recommend that they join Cyber Patriots, get some real world experience, take some cybersecurity classes in high school. Certifications, there is one called Security Plus. That is probably one of the best security certifications for them to get. And their high school, depending on where they go to school, may be offering others. Community colleges absolutely offer these security certificates. And they know that we are at a workforce deficit. They know not all students go to four-year university. So high schools and community colleges are starting to offer these types of classes, skills, and certifications to get students into the workforce. And we are so appreciative of that. Here's another great question. What near-term legislative measures do you need to address the jurisdictional issues to support local governments? Fantastic question. And that's what we hope to put the Governor's Cybersecurity Council to work thinking about. But right now, local governments, we live in a state that's essentially home ruled, which means local governments are in charge of their own domain. The state is not in charge. So at a very minimum, we need some sort of statutory authority to allow the state, or whoever we determine would be the right place to kind of build these services, to put in a minimum baseline standard, to tell local governments, you must adopt the NIST cybersecurity framework or adopt the CIS critical controls. or adhere to statewide policies. Right now, there's nothing that tells them they must do that. So we need something like that. Now, local governments are very concerned that that would be, for them, an unfunded mandate. So we need to think about how will we fund local governments sort of coming up to speed? If we tell them you must, how can we help them come up to speed? Secondly, it would be really helpful if we had some notification requirements like the state of Texas does, like I think the state of North Carolina does, and some other states do as well, that require local governments to notify the state when they have come under attack, when they've had a cyber incident, when they've responded to a cyber incident. It does a couple of things. It helps us to track better what's going on in our state so that we can better see what those needs are. It also could allow us to assist if we had the capability to assist. So those are a couple of things that we need to try to figure out. And I really appreciate the question. It shows that you're interested in helping me figure this out. Thank you for that. Another great question. Thank you for describing the overwhelming number of cyber threats. My constituents are mostly concerned about voting systems integrity. As an independent agency, does the Secretary of State participate in the cybersecurity threat awareness and mitigation community of the state, like Secure Colorado? So Secretary of State is a fantastic partner. And in fact, the Colorado Information Threat Sharing Network, CTIS, was their idea, and they created it, and they started it up as a way to make their counties and their election officials and the IT staff over the election systems aware of threats. And they allowed us to participate and allowed us to broaden it. So they are absolutely a fantastic partner. That monthly meeting that I talked about, where all of the state security leaders come together, Secretary of State participates every single month. They have a fantastic CTO and CISO in charge of security, as well as a fantastic CIO, all of which really understand the threats to the election system and are very, very good partners and cybersecurity professionals themselves. So they are absolutely participating. They, I often brag that I think Colorado is probably one of the best prepared states in the nation as far as our election systems because of their efforts. So thank you for the question. Another question, is the legislative box account encrypted? That's a great question for Larry Hofer, but I am confident that it is, because I have actually looked into that box technology. It's really good technology, and they do have encryption built in, and I'm assuming that you have an enterprise license for that, which gives you a lot of great capabilities. So I would assume that it is, but definitely follow up with Larry Hofer and he can get you more details about that. Let's see. Here's a question about Box versus Dropbox. And here's my answer. Any consumer version of anything, so whether it's Box or whether it's Dropbox or even whether it's Google, if you're using it as a private individual, look into those the consumer terms and what's the E stand for? T&E. Terms and I forget, agreements or whatever. Look into those terms. Make sure that you as an individual are okay with those terms. If you're okay with those terms, then it's okay for your individual consumer data. Now, if you are with an enterprise, you are going to want to look into what is the right tool for your enterprise. What can you put an enterprise agreement in place? And then how confident are you with your enterprise data? So I would say, I would lean typically more towards Box because they have a good enterprise platform and an enterprise agreement that many enterprises are willing to adopt. Again, talk with Larry, find out if you, the legislative branch, have the enterprise agreement and the enterprise version of Box. And then just make sure that, again, that you are comfortable that the data that you're putting in there either is protected for you as a consumer, or that your enterprise has an agreement in place that is protecting that. What else? What else can I answer?
These have been fantastic questions. Thank you all so much. And thank you so much, Debbi, for your responses. And I think if there aren't, if there aren't any further questions, then I think we will call it a good day. And Debbie, did you have any other final thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, just thank you again so much for attending. I really do appreciate, we in Colorado have had so much historical and current support from our legislators, and it's the reason that we've been able to grow our cybersecurity program the way we have. And so I just couldn't miss this opportunity to say thank you so much for your support, and for the way that you've been attentive to cybersecurity and to the needs of our agency over the years. Thank you so much, and thank you for attending, and feel free to reach out to me if there's any questions I can ever answer at any point in the future.
100%. Thank you so much, Debbie, for your leadership, truly. And thank you to all of our legislators and staff who attended today. It was a real pleasure being with you this morning, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.